Prospector News is media for educational purposes only and should not be construed as advice. We are not a certified financial analyst, licensed broker, or fund dealer, exempt market dealer, or hold a license to provide financial advice. We provide no legal opinion regarding accounting, tax, or law issues. Nothing in this podcast should be construed as investment advice or the solicitation to buy or sell stocks or commodities. All opinions expressed are those of the participants and should not be relied upon when making investment decisions. Those decisions should be made with the advice of a personal financial advisor. If you have enjoyed our podcast, please hit the like and share buttons and be sure to hit subscribe. I'm Michael Fox, and this is the Prospector News Podcast. And joining me, I have longtime contributor and friend Chris Temple of the National Investor. And today we're going to talk about the recent Fed meeting and the GDP announcements that came out this week. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, good morning. Crazy world, upside down as always. We get aggressive Fed rate hike and a technical recession by at least some folks' definition. And the markets say, "Oh, goody," and they rally.
Yeah, the market, I think, was being overly optimistic because a lot in the market was kind of contemplating that it might have been a full interest percentage rate increase rather than the 3/4. So that might account for some of that. But I have now a new favorite definition of a recession. Yeah, we are in a technical recession, but apparently it's not a recession now unless the Fed tells us it's a recession.
That's right. You know, we've got this bag lady, Janet Yellen, who every time she opens her mouth, it sounds like somebody went out on the street or pulled her out from under a bridge or something like that and threw her in front of a camera and say, try and talk intelligently about economics. And then we've got Fire Marshal Jay running the Fed, who really was the cause of this rally. You know, I said when we spoke a few weeks ago that I smelled this coming because I figured we'd get to the meeting this week and Powell would keep his options open and suggest that maybe they really are closer to the end of this rate hiking quest than to the beginning. And he said enough, you know, to convince the markets that they should buy these, you know, buy what they think are cheap assets. So we'll see how that works in the end. Even though I expected this rally, it doesn't change my view that it still is a rally within a broader bear market. So we'll see. It may end today or Monday, as you and I spoke off mic before we started recording. The NASDAQ, as of right now, is at a technical level where it will probably stall, if not turn around. So we'll see. But the Fed is trying in this particular instance to keep the bears at least a little bit honest. And so it's I don't know if we're going to get any strong direction either way, frankly, for a little while.
No, it's been a pretty gloomy market for the most of the summer. It's you know, a lot of chop, and as our friend Art Cashin likes to refer to it, is a lot of days where it's been a waste of car fare and a clean shirt.
That's right.
So this rally, you think it's going to peter out here in the next few days, and we're going to, you know, get back to the same kind of market trends we've had then?
Well, I think it's going to be choppy. You know, I've been saying regularly for a while now that my belief is that in a broad sense, we have entered the kind of a market that we had in the US from really the middle 60s all the way through the early 1980s, where you didn't have a strong bullish or bearish trend necessarily. You had a lot of back and forth. Don't forget that if you go to the history books, 1966 was the first time the Dow Jones Industrial Average hit the 1,000 mark. And it pulled back, went back up to that level, pulled back, went back up. We revisited it a handful of times. And so finally, and I think it was late 83, When the great bull market of the 80s was getting underway, we finally went through 1,000 and kept going. So I think right now there's still a lot of headwinds. There's a lot of fundamental reasons why we should or are going to remain in a bear market. But at the same time, there's still so much liquidity out there. The Fed, for all of the tough talk and all of the tough actions, at least on the surface, they've hardly, I mean, you got to use a magnifying glass to find how much their balance sheet has been reduced so far. They're still doing things with their open market operations that confuse me. And the whole interest rate thing, we'll see. I mean, what Powell told us the other day was that they're going to watch the data. They've got 2 months worth of employment numbers and inflation numbers. And I think at least one revision to this new second quarter GDP number to come. And they'll digest all of that. And then in September, make a judgment. I think they're wise to decide that they're not going to try and have the Federal Open Mouth Committee out there incessantly saying, "Oh, we might do 50. Oh, we might do 75. Oh, it could be this." Just shut up and do what you think you need to do when the time comes. Once upon a time, and I'm old enough to remember this, when I first got into business, the way we learned about Federal Reserve rate hikes was in an innocuous press release where Paul Volcker said, "Oh, by the way, I just raised the federal funds and discount rates by 75 basis points, and here's why. If you don't like it, too bad. Have a nice day." You didn't get this Chinese water torture treatment day after day after day of these people talking us to death. So I think that it's wise on their part to go back in this direction. But Powell said enough the other day, Mike, that the ones who want to still be bullish, the ones who have the muscle memory, that the Fed, when push comes to shove, will bail the markets out, et cetera. This is their day right now. For the last few days, the NASDAQ is now up 10% for July. But it's not going to last because I agree with the comment you made at the top of the show. And that is that, especially this morning, yet another new high for the Fed's favored PCE deflator number. They're not going to stop raising interest rates. Maybe they slowed down some, but I think that they still see this as job one.
When we did our last podcast, I did say that I didn't think that the Fed was going to stop raising rates until they started to see impacts in the job market. And I got to tell you, Chris, right now, this is the strangest recession. Oh, sorry, we're not allowed to call it a recession because the Fed hasn't declared it a recession yet. But it's the strangest economic situation where we're in a technical recession, yet we're at very high employment levels. Normally the recessions come with high unemployment, and that's not the case so far.
Well, it's not, no. And this is just one of many ways in which we really need to understand that we can't just use the old playbooks anymore. And the Fed needs to understand that. This is one of several structural issues that the economy is facing right now that we haven't faced in years, if ever. I hate to say this, but a couple of days ago, the morning of the Fed announcement, Pocahontas, the senator from Massachusetts, was on CNBC. And as much as I got to pinch myself to see if I'm really saying this, I have to throw in with some of what she said in criticizing the Fed. There's the old saying that when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, look, just like the Fed was not going to help things by printing so much money like it did, they are not going to help things by now going in the opposite direction. And I'll use oil as an example, which is, of course, a major factor contributing to the inflation numbers. The issues with oil have been exacerbated by the Fed. The oil price would never have gone as high as it did, nor would have a lot of prices gone as high as they did, were it not for the Fed printing all this money since the early part of 2020. But, look, the structural facts of life are that production and development have been hobbled by government policies and by regulators. We just don't have enough oil and enough refining capacity to go around. And that is not the thing you fix with monetary policy. You can exacerbate it in one direction or now perhaps the other. But what Senator Warren said was that you've got to consider things like that. And the Fed, with this blunt instrument of just raising interest rates when there's other factors involved here, needs to understand that it is, once again, not for the first time, going to hurt Joe Sixpack and Sally Soccer Mom when it does this. It is limited as to how much, if at all, it can rein in the inflation that is caused by these shortages, by supply deficits and things like that. But they're single-minded. And Powell admitted this the other day, which is one of the things that the Pollyannas are ignoring. And that is, he basically came out and told you, whether they want to quibble over the technical definition of recession or not, that yes, the Fed will be slowing growth to below trend, if you want to use that euphemism. Yes, the Fed will be weakening the employment picture. Both of those things as necessary consequences of bringing back, inflation back under some control. So, yeah, I mean, this isn't over yet. But we'll see what happens. The other thing that I'll be watching, of course, will be late August when the central bankers from the whole world meet at the Kansas City Fed sponsored summer picnic out in Wyoming. And I think that the dollar at that one is going to be a hot topic. So that may force the Fed to maybe back off a little bit.
That'll be interesting to see what comes up with that. As far as oil policy goes, I got to tell you, I cringed the last couple of weeks when I saw Joe Biden, off in Saudi Arabia, fist pumping, and begging for oil. And, we have a perfectly good energy partner up here in Canada that's, a lot more friendly and definitely doesn't have the same human rights records as Saudi Arabia has.
Well, and that's just one of a number of blatant inconsistencies, if not idiocy and hypocrisy. And I'll add to that, you may or may not have seen this, Mike, and our folks may not have seen this, but the U.S. Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, was just over in Australia. And she was talking about how the U.S. needs to prepare to not be caught with our pants down again, as we have been with things like rare earth processing and lithium processing and uranium and so forth, get ourselves off of this disproportionate dependence and vulnerability where supplies of a lot of these things from Russia and China are concerned. Well, what the hell is she doing in Australia? She should be making greater overtures, as you make the point, to Canada. We should be making sure that all the new deals in South America involve the U.S. as a partner to develop resources. We have had just in the recent past a number of new incursions into South America by primarily China to tie up resources, to build alliances and so forth, while we're worrying about the other part of the world, whether it's the proxy war that the deep state finally got thanks to Biden with Russia, or whether it's this action by Granholm over there in Australia, poking, America's eye, or finger rather, into China's eye by going to one of its main trading partners and trying to take them away. The hell with Australia, the hell with whatever resources we, quote, left behind in Afghanistan when we pulled out of there. Let's worry about our own backyard. I've said many a time this year that the U.S. has to dust off the Monroe Doctrine, quit worrying about the rest of the world, quit throwing trillions of dollars away on these wars of intrigue and conquest to keep America's hegemony alive in what is a declining empire, and a deservedly declining empire. Let's get back somewhat to the founding principles of this country, which included staying the hell out of other people's business and worrying about our own backyard. You and I have talked about this before when it comes to energy and the green energy transition, which we need to do, and all of these different kind of things, Mike, that the U.S. and Canada could have a glorious few decades ahead of us if the proper people got a hold of these policies and these initiatives and decided that within our own part of the world, not shipping things across the oceans, not requiring wars and intrigue elsewhere to protect goods that we don't need from halfway around the world. But if we build up our own hemisphere, if you had the US and Canada, Mexico, South America, all singing from the same song sheet, all working together as allies, we would have something rivaling a new industrial age that would bring prosperity, great jobs, and everything else. But the people in charge don't make enough money doing that. They've got to do the other stuff.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, but a little bit of credit where credit is due. And I think they've changed it, the name of the bill again, but in what was the Build Back Better bill, that they have just made a new agreement with. Part of the provisions in that is that the metals for electric cars to be considered to get the government grants to help facilitate their purchase can now come from free trading nations such as Canada as well as the US. So a little bit of sense and sensibility. Of course, that bill has not yet been passed, but
You're right.
There's a glimmer of hope that maybe some sense is coming into the bigger picture again.
Yes, there is, and I'll second that notion that there are some in Congress now that are getting a lot more serious, even though it's part boondoggle, you've got this CHIPS Act. And I think that's where this provision is included. I'm getting confused with all of these competing bills, but generally speaking, you do have a movement in Congress with at least some Republican support that is trying to bring a lot of chip manufacturing back here. And as you point out, with the subsidy for electric vehicles, which I think that specifically, I think is a bad idea. I think it's premature because just providing subsidies so people can afford electric vehicles does not in and of itself bring you more of the battery metals needed to do it. But they're at least taking a couple of baby steps in the right direction.
Yeah, well, and we're a long ways still from the battery vehicles. We have a huge infrastructure deficit that has to be closed before we could get to the stage that they want with the electric vehicles. Like I laugh at the irony in Texas where they're telling you that yes, buy an electric car, but don't turn on your air conditioning because we haven't got enough electricity.
Well, you gotta love it. I mean, I think you and I may have talked about the story before, but some of these people are just so clueless as to really what it takes to bring about the kind of world they want. And I've used this example before. I don't remember if it was with you or not, but I'll do it again anyway. A few months back, I was listening to a segment with Mary Barra, who's the CEO of General Motors, and a woman who is also the CEO of Pacific Gas and Electric. And they were talking about their plan, among other things, to retrofit people's houses so that if the power goes out, your electric vehicle could be essentially your generator to provide power for your house, which is doable, but only in a minor way. So they're all hot about this idea, which is still somewhat pie in the sky. But yet, when Barra was asked where she's getting the battery metals from to build all these electric vehicles, and of course the batteries required for it and the huge amounts of copper and so forth, she didn't have the slightest idea where she's getting them from. She couldn't even understand the difference between battery metals and precious metals. I mean, the woman's an idiot. And yet she's the one that's in charge for General Motors, at least of doing this. Now, you've got Tesla and more recently Ford, who are getting more aggressive to tie up directly the battery metals they're going to need for the future. And that's going to be an evolving investment theme that I'm pretty darn excited about, Mike. But yeah, I mean, you've still got, unfortunately, most of this stuff being dictated by people who think that these car companies have just magical extrusion machines that just out of the ether spits out electric Teslas and electric Fords and electric whatever. electric Hummers, and that we don't need the utilities to power them. It's just a combination of fairy dust and unicorn piss. It's silly. And yes, there is finally some reality setting in with some people. But I think it's going to take, unfortunately, my view is that it's still going to take a major economic and a much larger energy crisis than what we've seen already before people get shaken into a bit even more reality, and a few of the adults come back into the room and start doing all of this right.
I don't disagree, and unfortunately, I think we're on the precipice of that energy crisis in Europe this fall if Russia does turn off the gas.
I'll tell you what, if nothing else, for getting us into this war with Russia, which of course his handlers and he personally had been pining for years to get us into this war with Russia over the pretext of Ukraine. Biden should be impeached, if nothing else, for dramatically and negatively impacting the way of life and the cost of living for the average American with this so-called cause. I mean, he's the one in the first place back in 2014 and 15 who helped to overthrow the last Ukraine government, which was friendly to Russia. And I'll tell you, I just read this week through the single best service that I subscribe to called Geopolitical Futures. A guy named George Friedman is the chief cook and bottle washer there. They're not partisan. They're not for or against the commies, the Ruskies, America, any of that kind of thing. They analyze facts on the ground. And he was even reporting this week that in Ukraine, where you still always have at least some elements of the country friendly to Russia, that they're getting sick and tired of Zelensky. He and his wife posing for photo shoots with Vogue magazine. Give me a break. But here in America, we're going to see the average house in the northern part of the country pay drastically more, perhaps record prices, to heat their homes this coming winter, all because the U.S. has unilaterally surrendered a world-leading cheap energy picture that we had control of with our natural gas, because we've got to go and stir up this hornet's nest in Europe and Eurasia. And now, because of the trouble that we started, Vladimir Putin did not start this. We started it. NATO started it. Now we're going to have to give away our cheap natural gas and see our prices for natural gas move up towards the much higher levels in Europe, because now we've got to bail out Europe. This is mindless. It's costing money. It's costing lives. And again, for what? So the military industrial complex and the deep state here in the US can continue their games and their profits with things that economically make absolutely no sense, let alone what the cost is in human life.
So do you think if we get to the stage, and I'm not, I'm hoping I'm not playing doom and gloom, but I'm trying to be pragmatic about it. If we get to the stage where energy prices spike dramatically like they could this winter, I foresee people being taken out of their houses, essentially frozen to death. Is that going to cause a change in policy? Is that what it's going to unfortunately going to take?
Well, I'm not sure that it's going to get to that extreme here in the U.S. It could in parts of Europe where there's no question there's going to be a shortage. I mean, this idea that the EU has had in recent days, they're going to ask everybody to voluntarily reduce consumption by 15%. That's not going to cut it. Nor are they, starting to get coal back online fast enough for anything else. You could have prevented all of this, Mike, if 30 years ago, when George Bush Sr. and Mikhail Gorbachev sat down to write the death warrant of the old Soviet Union and to sign it, part of which involved the reunification of Germany. You could have avoided all of this had George Bush and his successors kept the key promise that we made to Gorbachev. And that is, in return for the reunification of Germany and ending the Cold War, we will not be part of NATO seeking to expand its geographical and political influence. And every single president since then has broken that promise, to the point where Russia, with NATO expanding, allegedly defensively, but tell the people in Afghanistan and Yugoslavia and elsewhere that it was, quote, defensive. Now we get to the point where Vladimir Putin, after several years, and this is after Russia's or Ukraine's government was overthrown, partly by Biden and some of his crew, Putin finally said, "Look, this is it. You cross this next line, and I'm going to go in and take part of Ukraine or all of Ukraine." And so we instigated this. So the sad thing is, historically, two things, and we didn't mean to get on this tangent necessarily, but I think it's important for people to understand this and how it's affecting energy prices, how it's affecting the move away from the US dollar, and so many things that are part of this globally, Mike, that what should have happened when Gorbachev and Bush Sr. agreed to all of this was that if we had good leaders in Europe, they'd have said to the US, "Hey, thanks for everything. We really appreciate it. We'll never forget it, but get the hell out of here. We don't need you, to micromanage our continent and our economies and our security any longer. We can get along with Russia just fine because, after all, they're our neighbor, not yours." Had that happened, you would today not have any of this going on. Russia would long since have not just been Europe's gas station, but Russia would have been a key economic and political ally in a broader sense, and allied with Europe and by extension with the US against the real global threat, which is China. But we didn't do that. There were people in this country and in NATO who could not fathom the idea that the end of the Cold War meant the end of their gravy train and no more zillions of dollars of military spending like it had been. That was unacceptable to them, and that's why we're where we are today. It's a tragic thing that shows how military and war and money ruin lives and has disrupted this whole world.
No disagreement from me. So if my listeners want to hear more about your view in the world, where would they get a hold of you?
Well, assuming they still do, just go to nationalinvestor.com. And there's a couple of things on there in the recent past where I've talked about some of these geopolitical factors. Importantly, where I've talked about China also, because that's something that I think a lot of investors aren't paying nearly enough attention to. That China has been on the edge of a major implosion for quite a while. And they've been able, through, by hook and crook and a shell game, to officially keep everything afloat. But Evergrande, the huge real estate firm, biggest one in the world, that went belly up a while back, they're not having a very good time right now, coming to a deal to play extend and pretend with their creditors. They're running out of time. There have been a handful of other real estate concerns that have gone bust. You've had bank runs in China. A lot of people have seen that, I'm sure, in the news and on social media. So it's not a pretty picture. And how that all is going to play out with the geopolitical shift, with this emerging bloc of Russia, China, and India, and unfortunately some countries even in our own hemisphere as part of that, remains to be seen. But this is a really fraught time, not only because of what's going on with the Fed, and we're at the end of this latest bubble finance wave, and we don't know what the fallout is going to be, but this shift of geopolitical influence in the world, and the world, moving away in fits and starts from the total dominance that the U.S. and the U.S. dollar have had on the globe since really the end of World War II. These are unprecedented things, Mike. We've never lived through these before, and I think people need to get their heads out of their lower orifices, as it were, and stop listening to Fox News on the one hand and MSNBC on the other. Maybe there's a couple of good parts of each of those, maybe more so with Fox, but even Fox News is rah-rah for war. So we need to understand that the world is changing. It's going to be changing irreversibly, and there's a lot of fallout from that. So you get rid of your preconceived notions, and and look at what's really going on in the world. And that's what I try and help people do.
Perfect. You know what? That sounds like a perfect segue into our next discussion in a couple of weeks' time. What do you think?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks for joining me, and enjoy the rest. Enjoy your summer, and we'll pick up the talk on China in a couple of weeks.
Sounds great, Mike. Take care.